It is Friday, August the 2nd, 2024. Not quite Black Friday, but certainly a disastrous day on the American stock market. According to the FT, the Fed is under fire as a slowing jobs market fans fear of recessions. The Wall Street Journal is even more dramatic, talking about the hitting job slowdown hitting stocks. NASDAQ sinks 2.5%. Ending in a correction. It speaks of the chaos of economics and of the stock markets. One man who's quite critical of that chaos is our guest today. Doyne Farmer is one of the world's leading scientists of complexity, and he has a new book out, Making Sense of Chaos, A Better Economics for a Better World. He's joining us from Santa Fe in New Mexico. He divides his time between Santa Fe, New York, and Oxford in England, where he also teaches. Doyne, congratulations on the new book. Are you or are you not an economist? What do you make of days like today when the stock market dramatically goes up or down?
Well, I'm by practice an economist. I'm just a very unconventional one. And I wasn't tracking events today, but one of the things I do write about in my book is things we can do to make the market operate more smoothly, and how we start with a theory that lets markets fail and lets them operate inefficiently so that we can understand how to make them work better.
Doyne, I'm not sure if you're familiar with the work of Elizabeth Pop Berman. She was on the show. She's another unconventional economist. She was on the show a year or two ago talking about why she thinks that thinking like an economist might be a form of madness. You noted that you're an unconventional economist. How would you define the science? Is it a science?
Well, there is some science there. There's also some non-science there. I mean, in my book, I actually bent over backwards not to be critical of economists because I don't want to make them angry at me, or I want them to pay attention to what I'm doing more accurately. But I think economics has the potential to really be a science, but it has a ways to go.
As I said in the introduction, Doyne, you're also a pioneer of the science of complexity. Is economics, as a quote unquote science, is that exhibit A in terms of complexity? For most of us, and I would include certainly myself in this, it's really hard to make sense of economics. On a day like today, when the markets dramatically fluctuate, it's never quite clear why or how. I mean, it's clear how people sell or buy stocks, but it's not clear why.
Well, one of the points I discuss is the way the market makes its own news. We know from studies that only about a third of large moves in the market actually have anything to do with news. The other 2/3, and the biggest ones, in fact, all come on days where there's essentially no news. And we see this in our complexity economics models. We make simulations with value investors and momentum traders and so on. And we can see that we get much more volatility than the fundamentals would suggest. We have booms and crashes in our more realistic models. And that the market is not necessarily following information. It offers, I think, ways to redesign markets or change the rules to make them operate more consistently and more productively.
Like any intellectual discipline, Doyne, and you don't need me to tell you this, there are traditions in economics. Adam Smith, of course, the founder, the Marxian tradition, Ricardo, the neoliberals of the 20th century, perhaps a school that now is in retreat. Is there a school that you feel yourself to be part of as an unconventional economist, or are you in your own school? Is there a Doyne Farmer school of economics?
Well, I'm part of a school called complexity economics, but even within complexity economics, there's a lot of diversity in how people approach the problem. But it's a pretty small group. I would say there are perhaps 50 of us scattered around the world. more junior ones coming up through the ranks these days. A lot of interest from young people because they're dissatisfied with the tenets of mainstream economics. So it's a movement that's growing. It's growing also because we have increasingly better computer power, increasingly more data, and those things are what we thrive on. Complexity economics is really well equipped to take advantage of better data and better computing power. And so the time is ripe, and I think the movement's really starting to take off.
Who came up with the term, Doyne, complexity economics? Does it have a father, a mother,
Yeah,
an origin?
it has a father, Brian Arthur, who was, like me, also affiliated with the Santa Fe Institute. And I'm not sure exactly when he coined the term. I would guess in the late 90s. And I think the term is coined mainly to attach it to the broader discipline of complex system science that, or if you can call that a discipline, it's in a sense a movement, an interdisciplinary movement. But because complexity economics, we just apply methods and ideas from complex system science to economics. And so that name makes that correspondence clear. It's a little confusing because it suggests that we're only looking at really complicated things. Complexity and complication aren't really the same thing. And we often look at simple things as well.
Last year, we did an interview with Sandrine Dixon de Clèves. She runs the Club of Rome. I'm sure you're familiar with some of her work. She talks in our interview, she talked about there not being a stock market on a dead planet. I'm not sure if she's a complex economist. She's more of a political figure. But is that the premise of complex economics, Doyne? Doyne, that it's an attempt to rethink the very foundations of what economics should do, or am I getting that wrong?
Well, you're certainly right that we're rethinking the foundations of how to build economic models. In that, normal economic models, mainstream economic models, are based on equations, mathematical equations that express the idea that we're all utility maximizing agents, and we're all able to take each other into account and calculate the very best decisions we could possibly make in the economic world we live in. Whereas we take, heuristics, ways people actually make decisions, rules of thumb, simple learning algorithms, the ability to look ahead a few steps, but not an infinite number of steps. And we put them into computer simulations where agents process information, make decisions. Those decisions have economic impact. That economic impact generates new information. Some other information may flow in from the outside. The agents make decisions again, and then we just go around and around that loop. So it's a much more dynamic view because it's based on computer simulation. It's very flexible. We can put in lots of features of the real economy and make things as realistic as we need to. And the foundations are really different because we're not assuming perfect utility maximizing agents from the outset.
So again, and I hope I'm not trivializing what you're doing, would it be fair to say that it's a data centric or a data heavy discipline, borrowing from some of the principles of behavioral economics?
Yes and no. It's certainly data intensive, and we are certainly borrowing from behavioral economics, but we're not just using data. We make models of the world. So we put in prior knowledge about economic structures. We look to the behavioral economists in part for the rules we put in about how people make decisions. And we really try and understand cause-effect relationships. And our models have the advantage over mainstream statistical models that do just take data and fit functions to the data. Our models have the advantage that we understand more about cause and effect, and we can do what-if experiments. We can do counterfactuals of what if we implemented a new policy, how would that change the economy?
Doyne, you noted earlier that complex economists like yourself call into question I guess it's the rationally self-interested model of traditional economics, the Smithian model. What does the data tell us? Why do we do things in economics? So if we're not maximizing our profit, if it's not a simple utilitarianism, what is it?
Well, we have goals. People want a better life. So we don't deny that there's some form of utility and goal-seeking behavior. What I think people don't do is maximize their utility. I certainly don't maximize mine. I'm very aware of all the ways in which I don't achieve my goals, constantly trying to do things better because I know I'm not doing them perfectly. And so it's a question of how good, mainstream economists wouldn't claim that people are exactly maximizing utility. They said, well, but it's a good enough approximation. We think that that's only really true in very simple situations. As soon as things get complicated, it's pretty hard to do that. And it can become a very poor approximation. It's also, as a method, it's very constraining because if to get the answer, you have to write down everybody's utility functions and find the solution that maximizes everybody's utility. You can't do that, even with modern computers. You can't do that when things start to get at all complicated. Once you have more than about, 5 agents or something like that, it just gets too hard to solve the equations. So whereas because we use computer simulations and because people aren't maximizing in our models, they're just doing the best they can at the time. And or at least doing something that a rule that they understand or follow because it's relatively easy to use and not too computationally intensive. Our models are much more tractable so that we can make them much more realistic, which we think is where the real virtue comes in of this approach.
Doyne, you noted earlier that you don't maximize your own utility. I'm sure I don't maximize mine either. But how do we determine utility? We've done shows, for example, on the role of time in economics. One with the English economist Charles Crowson, why time is so central. We've done shows on how from some of your Oxford colleagues, about how we should think like ancestors and imagine that utility isn't just determined or quantified by ourselves and our own lives, but by our children and our grandchildren. Is the word utility, Doyne, is it a useful word, or do we need to come up perhaps with better words, better language to describe the complexity of the human condition?
Yeah, I think, well, I don't know about the word, but I do think we need richer concepts to think about what actually gives us happiness and what it is that we're really trying to, what are our real goals. Utility in economics is just a sort of scorecard, and typically it's used to say that people want to consume as much as they possibly can. And that's problematic in and of itself. It is true that we want the economy to be stimulated, and oftentimes that's what that boils down to. But we certainly need to start taking into account externalities like environmental harm better than we do, and incorporate those kind of things into our models in a stronger sense. And again, complexity economics makes that easier to do because they're very flexible, and it's not difficult to put those kind of concerns in.
But how do we determine? And I want to come to the meat in your new book after the break. But how do we determine utility? One person's utility might be something different in somebody else. Someone without children, for example, someone entirely self-interested, a Donald Trump type of person, may only think of themselves. And if the planet is destroyed because of their behavior after they die, they may say, well, I don't care. It's not my problem. Is this a useful word? And how do you model it? How can you model something that's so subjective?
Yeah, well, I share your concerns. First of all, I think what you just said is right. Economists typically model things by drastically simplifying it and assume everybody has a similar utility function, or they certainly don't take into account the kind of heterogeneity that you're talking about between selfish people and charitable people and so forth. These models are much, much simpler than that. But I share your concerns, and it's one of the reasons that I'm not very fond of the whole idea.
Fond of which idea?
The idea of utility as a useful way to think about the world. I think, the way we actually operate is just a bit different than that. We do have goals. We do try to seek things to make our lives better, but it's, as you said, much more complicated and, in a sense, cruder at the same time, because we aren't achieving those goals, and because mathematically our utility is hard to characterize. And so I think it's better to just look at what are the kinds of decisions people will make in a given environment. So say in some of my models, I have fundamentalist investors. What do those investors do? Well, they buy undervalued assets, they sell overvalued assets. That's something you can go out and observe. That's certainly what they're trying to do when they're operating in the world. And so you can just write down the behavioral rules. Other examples of behavioral rules are imitate the best. Look around and see who's doing a good job. Copy them. Trial and error. Try things out. Choose whatever is working the best for you. And, we do have scores for what's working the best. We might want to make more money. We might even want to be kind to our neighbors. And we might want to incorporate that into our goals as well. So I just think it's more complicated and far from the idealized version that we find in economics.
Usually when people say it's more complicated, they mean that they don't quite understand it. But when Doyne Farmer says it, he means that it's part of his complex world, and he's a man who is making sense. If anyone's making sense of chaos, it's him. His new book is called Making Sense of Chaos, A Better Economics for a Better World. I want to talk after the break about that better economics for a better world more specifically, but I want to thank our friends at Liberties, an excellent new quarterly of culture and politics, also a little bit of economics in it, trying to, like Doyne, trying to figure out a better economics, culture, politics for a better world. We're going to run a short feature on Liberties, and then we'll be back specifically with Doyne Farmer to talk about a better economics for a better world. So don't go away, anyone. We'll be back in a second.
The noise, there is nuance, insight. Liberties is not just a journal of ideas. It's a meteor of intelligent substance. It's the place to be for engaged citizens. Politics, opinion, substance. Liberties is a triumph for freedom of thought. A quarterly of urgency, of cultural exploration, of intellectual delight, of immaculate prose. It's invaluable. Subscribe now or find Liberties at your favorite bookseller.
And you can subscribe at libertiesjournal.com. We're speaking one of the world's leading scientists of chaos, a theorist of chaos in all its forms. He has a new book out, Doyne Farmer. It's called, appropriately enough, Making Sense of Chaos, A Better Economics for a Better World. Doyne, again, I'm coming back to language here because it's so important in terms of making sense of all this. What does the word better mean? You've used it twice in your subtitle.
Well, better means what we want it to mean in a way. That is, I view my role as a scientist as understanding cause-effect relationships so that we can know if we make a certain decision, what's the outcome likely to be? If we make a different decision, what that outcome might be, so that people can choose the outcome they like better. And so it's in that sense of better. I'm not the one who will necessarily say what better is. That's where the citizen democracy part comes in. Now, I, of course, have my own vision of that. And it's certainly a world that's greener, less polluted, where we have growth, but we have sustainable growth that respects the environment. But that's my opinion as a citizen. And that's the choice I hope people will make.
So we'll come to that better world in a second. But when it comes to better economics, it seems to me what you're saying is a better economics tells a more accurate version of the world, certainly of our economic world. It's more truthful. Does that suggest that most economists and most economics these days gives us a false impression of the world?
Well, I would say it's just often not useful at giving us the answers we want. It, for example, didn't anticipate the 2008 crisis because people didn't realize what the side effects of mortgage-backed securities were going to be. And I think if we'd had the kind of complexity economics models that we're building, we could have anticipated that better. Similarly, in dealing with climate change and the energy transition, we're making choices. Should we invest in this technology or that technology, nuclear reactors or solar farms? And so we want to fully understand the consequences of making those investments. And that's where we try to provide better guidance with the models that we have.
Let's address global warming. It's central in your argument, central in the book. And in fact, you have, I know, a consultancy, Macrocosm, which addresses many of the issues around carbon and decarbonization. What does traditional economics, Doyne, tell us about the current global warming crisis, the crisis of the environment?
Well, there's, of course, different points of view, but Bill Nordhaus, who got the Nobel Prize for his work in climate economics, in his first paper, actually said that the optimal temperature that we should let warming happen to is around 5 degrees centigrade. I mean, that's a lot of warming. His more recent papers say like 3.2, 3.3 degrees centigrade. That's still a lot of warming. I think the optimal would have been 0, or it would have been a small number anyway. And I think we're looking at understanding what's likely to happen with new technologies so that we can anticipate what they will cost in the future and what the transition will actually cost us. And one of the things we found is that it actually doesn't cost us anything, because we can, as we transition to new technologies, energy prices will go down and keep going down to a point where we have cheaper energy than we've ever had in history.
There seems to be two, and we've done many shows, Doyne, on this, as you can imagine, two primary schools of economic thinking when it comes to the environment. On the one hand, they're the degrowth people who suggest that capitalism and a healthy environment aren't compatible. On the other hand, there are those who believe that if we leave the market alone, we can get the kind of innovation that will create technologies and new companies that will successfully address the crisis of global warming. It is complex chaos economics. Is that a third school, or does it fit into one of the two that I introduced?
Well, I think there is a third school. I'm not sure it's exactly complexity economics. Maybe I'll speak a little more personally, but I certainly think there is a third view, which is that by the right policy nudges and by investing in the technologies that are very likely to pay off, that can provide us with a much cleaner and more sustainable world, we can grow. And it's a really slightly restrained capitalism. Capitalism ranges from, say, Swedish capitalism to American capitalism. There's quite a gap, and I think it does. I think we do need some regulation to push us in the right directions in places, but I don't think it needs to be very heavy-handed, because we have the good luck that just when we need them, new technologies are appearing on the stage to solve the problems that we've created by our use of fossil fuels.
You use the N word, Doyne, nudge, which is, of course, a term popularized and popular amongst behavioral economists. Is that really, and again, we talked about behavioral economics earlier, is your, and correct me if I'm wrong, is your cautious optimism on the environment rooted in the nudging strategy of behavioral economics, that we can be nudged through the market and perhaps some regulation towards fixing this, what some people at least see as an existential problem?
Yeah, I was really using the word in a different sense. When you come to policies can be heavy-handed or light touch. And I really meant more light touch than I did in the sense of kind of tricking people into following some particular idea. I think policies like the IRA, which has recently passed in the US, that pumps money into and is pumping money into new technologies and accelerating their development, is a good thing. It's a good thing because it's going to help us stop emitting greenhouse gases sooner. And it's a good thing because it's actually going to help the economy. And so I think there are policies like that work together with capitalism to push us in the right direction.
You mentioned there's quite a difference between, say, what you call the Swedish model, where there's a degree of regulation, versus the American model, which is about as unregulated capitalism as you can get. In terms of your better economics, are there examples of countries, regimes, which are doing a better job? Is the Swedish or the Danish or the German model, is it better than the American model or the British model?
Well, I mean, I do think countries like Denmark are doing a pretty good job. You just go there and experience how people are living. It's pretty good. And I think many people view that as a sort of ideal. Of course, you have to do what's culturally feasible within the country you're in. So we can't just suddenly snap our fingers and become Danes. We also, say in America, are dealing with a much more heterogeneous population that culturally and racially, that makes things more challenging. But yeah, I do think some governments work a lot better than others. And, it seems that it takes some experience and evolution and tinkering to get government right.
Doyne, as I said, the subtitle of your new book, Making Sense of Chaos, A Better Economics for a Better World. We've talked about the better economics. What is a better world for you? What does it look like? Imagine, close your eyes and imagine a world. You're in Santa Fe, a place where it's probably more useful to close your eyes than other places. What does a better world look like from your perspective?
Well, in Santa Fe, you want to open your eyes because the sky is so beautiful that
you're right. Yeah,
something
so
you want
go
to
the
look
wrong
at.
way around. Well,
But
keep your eyes open, but imagine they're shut.
Yeah.
What does a better world for you, J. Doyne Farmer? What does it look like?
Well, I grew up in Silver City, New Mexico, which, with respect to which Santa Fe's a giant metropolis. So I really grew up spent a lot of time in the wilderness, and I have a very green vision of the world I would like to live in. I'd like to live in a world where people can also always freely exchange ideas, a world of more equality. I think my vision of where I'd like to go is probably shared with many people. A green world free of pollution, full of freedom, full of artistic expression, and with the basic needs being satisfied, but without ostentatious displays of wealth.
That sounds to me, and I share that vision, but it sounds, particularly in the context of the United States, to be somewhat utopian.
Yeah, well, I'm a utopian kind of person. I think utopian visions are very useful in guiding us. Of course, we're never going to achieve those utopias, but it's good to think about what our utopias are, so we at least know which direction we want to move in.
Well, let's end then with a more concrete vision. You've acknowledged that you're a utopian, which I think is a credit. But how do we get there, J. Doyne Farmer? What would you suggest over the next few years we can begin to create a better economics for a better world? For you, of course, as for most of us, those two are intimately connected. If we have a better economics, whatever that means, then that will result in a better world. What can we do concretely in the short or the medium term? You're an economist, so of course the famous Keynesian joke about in the long run we're all dead is relevant. But what can we do in the short to medium term to push, to borrow a word from you, to nudge us towards a better world?
Yeah, well, several things. First of all, what I'm trying to do is create new economic models that are really comprehensive. I want to take the things we've been doing and scale them up, reduce them to practice, so that we can give good advice that helps governments make decisions that will help their countries develop and participate in the green energy revolution, that will help businesses understand what the opportunities are to grow the economy in a sustainable way. And I think normal individuals, I think everybody has to find their own way to contribute to that cause. Because as you mentioned, I think a lot of us share similar vision, but we all need to do our part to try and get to that vision. Elect leaders that don't do crazy things, for example.
Well, I can imagine your politics, J. Doyne Farmer. Interesting new book, important new book, Making Sense of Chaos, A Better Economics for a Better World. A man who, in some ways, has pioneered the science of chaos. You once bankrupted, I think, a casino. So you have a very good understanding of risk. Congratulations on the new book. And we'll get you back on the show, perhaps, Doyne, in the not too distant future, to make more sense of chaos. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.